Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're back for part two of the discussion of the defense against the Commanders from that Week 6 game. Big win for the Ravens, obviously. Joining us to talk about the defense is Cordell Woodland. Cordell, how you doing?
What's going on, Ken? Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. We hope you'll go back and listen to part one. Lots of interesting discussion about what the DMV is, where it extends to, how Baltimore and Washington are very significant rivals for fans in both baseball and football. A lot of things about the Ravens and what they did defensively in this game package-wise, whether or not Ardarius Washington is staged to take a much bigger role in this defense based on some changes made in the second half. We talked about a very limited use of pass rush, containment of Daniels. Obviously Jaden Daniels is still a very, very fine talent and great to see these QBs, but also kind of hate some of the Lamar Jackson light stuff, some of the talk of there being a Beltway, rivalry and whatnot, and Cordell being a longtime Washington football team's fan. It has had a lot of interesting insights into what the Nationals were trying to bring to the table as well. So hope you go back to that and listen. And today we're going to talk about the individual performances on the defense. Cordell, start us off. Who would you like to talk about first?
Yeah, I mean, we could. How about Brandon Stephens? I think there's been a lot of talk about Brandon Stephens, and he's, I think, a tough player to kind of grade because I think he's a really good corner. I mean, I find me another corner in the league that kind of sticks to receivers the way Brandon Stephens does. Is few like him, but he is open to giving up plays down the field. He struggles to find the ball when it's in the air, and it's clear that's on the scouting report because teams kind of attack that every week. But I think he's a really good corner. He doesn't translate his good play doesn't translate to turnovers, and he will be susceptible to giving up big plays. But I just think when you're talking about somebody that's going to stick to a receiver stride for stride, it's tough to find somebody that does it as good as Brandon Stephens does. So I just think he's a tough player to kind of talk about because you see him give up catches, but also you see him kind of blanketing receivers on a daily basis.
Yeah, that affects the quarterback too. And it's an important point that you're bringing up is when you see a guy running stride for stride, the quarterback's first concern is, how do I put this ball in a place where it can't be intercepted? And he'll often overthrow that player, and there's a lot of incompletes that way. When the ball's coming in, you're 100% on the money that Brandon Stephens does not find the football in the air, not at all. In fact, I even wonder if he were playing cover 3, which the Ravens don't seem to have him. The matchup zones they play by side don't end up with him coming downhill towards the football very often. I'm not sure that he would be exceptionally good at that, or if that would just be an opportunity for him to look at the football and lose the receiver. He stays right with that receiver, and he has to make a play on the football based on what he sees the receiver's hands doing. And I think that's where the weakness will come in is if once the other receivers realize that, delay your movement of your hands as long as you can in terms of going up for that football. And also extremely susceptible to the back shoulder throw because of it. We saw that happen a couple times with Keon Coleman against the Buffalo, turning around, finding the football in the air. And I think that, quarterbacks who throw the ball on a line like that before the break are the kind of quarterbacks that give Stephens the most trouble, given he is. He's given up 8.6 yards per target this year. He does a very good job of not getting penalized, staying as close as he does. He had, of course, that big penalty in the Oakland game, right? Yeah, the Oakland game that arguably cost him the game. But he's been pretty good about not getting penalized this year. I'm positive on Stephens. I just think when you look at the players who are on this team, I don't see a good hope that he's one of the guys that gets re-signed. I think they need the money for Travis Jones, Isaiah Likely, Tyler Linderbaum this offseason. Kyle Hamilton will be a year removed from Linderbaum, even though they're drafted in the same class, because Tyler Linderbaum, they have to play left tackle money if they give him the 5th-year option. So they're not going to do that. But they'll probably sign Linderbaum a year earlier because of it. And Hamilton is a cheap price tag at safety for that 5th year. So they're not going to have a problem with just allowing that decision to be deferred. But the Ravens, I mean, if you thought the free agent exodus this year was bad, it could be a hell of a lot worse this next year, or worse after 2025, I should say.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what they decide to do with Brandon Stephens. I feel like he's a guy that I was kind of wondering if they try to get a deal done with him before the season started, and that didn't end up happening. At this point now, I'm curious to see what they decide to do. I mean, I don't think he's a guy that's necessarily going to go out on the open market and demand top cornerback money, but he's a really good player. You could do far worse than Brandon Stephens at corner. The Ravens are just in a situation where they do have a lot of depth at the position right now. And you're right, they've got some young studs that they have to pay coming up. And defense seems to be more systematic. So they're probably more inclined to feel like they could find another corner that can give them the same thing. I mean, look, Stephens is a converted safety who's a converted running back. So, if he's been able to kind of have the success that he's had over the last couple of years, despite the position changes, they probably feel like they could take their chances with another young guy. I mean, we know they drafted Nate Wiggins. They also have, I don't know why, TJ Tampa as well. So, who we really haven't gotten to see yet. So I think that they feel like they'll probably be fine and probably try to use that money elsewhere as well. But it wouldn't shock me if Stephens, as always, right player, right price. If he fits their price, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, that's the thing. I would expect not top cornerback money either. But, is this the kind of deal you can get at 3 years, 27 million, something like that? Maybe it's not even that high in terms of what you have to pay him. But he's not a $15 million or an $18 million corner. That's right, for sure. And I don't think the Ravens can afford another contract in that range unless it serves their purpose directly. Travis Jones is too important for this team. We talked a lot about Travis Jones in that first episode, by the way. Go back and listen to that if you haven't. But the pairing of him and Madubuike is so important that I think you have another big contract on the defensive line you really have to sign. And then, Mark Andrews is a potential cap savings, but if you're going to harvest that, then you really have to sign Isaiah Likely. And I would anyway, but it's the Ravens are tight to the cap to start with. They've got a couple of guys who seem like fairly obvious cuts. And then they've the other guy they have to, I can't believe I blanked on this earlier. That's all their left tackle situation. Maybe that's Ronnie Stanley. Maybe he stays, but that's a lot of money.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ronnie's played well to this point. He's having a bounce back year, and it's kind of the gift and the curse for the Ravens, because it's great that their left tackle can still play at a high level, but it also kind of lets you know that maybe you're going to have to put in more money into Ronnie Stanley, and who knows what he looks like after that. His injury concerns and the way that he has played on a consistent level over the last couple of years makes you wonder what the future holds. But I'm not surprised to see Ronnie kind of step back up this year and bounce back. I mean, health is a big part of his struggles, and he has been healthy for the most part this year. So I don't think it's a coincidence that it's coinciding with his good play. He had a really good camp. He's out there pretty much every day as well. But yeah, I am curious to see how the Ravens go about handling the cap going forward. To their credit, I don't think that they're going to lose anybody that they don't want to lose. I don't see Likely going anywhere. I don't necessarily see Linderbaum going anywhere. I don't see Hamilton going anywhere. Travis Jones, I feel like they could possibly, I think they'll probably be able to get that done as well. So in that front, I think they'll be fine. It always comes to the external options. I don't think they'll have a lot of money to spend externally on a lot of these guys, but in terms of their in-house guys, I think they do a pretty good job of keeping the people that they really want to keep.
Yeah, that's the real gift of being a Ravens fan. So you have good drafts, you're going to have some absolutely heartbreaking things that occur from the players you lose. And it's gonna hurt like hell when Mark Andrews leaves town. But given what's going on, it is what it is. And Marcus Williams, in terms of per snap productivity, those first 2 years was absolutely terrific player. We don't have maybe the same kind of bond in this city that we had with Ed Reed, certainly with Marcus Williams. But it's a sad thing to see a player like that have to leave as well. And I think the $5.3 million in savings is going to be too much for the Ravens to pass up. So let me pick another player. We'll move on here. I think Yannick Ngakoue. Really nice to see him playing with the kind of speed, the kind of motor he has. He's all about using his speed to find a better gap. Big time looper. And with the Ravens who've got on the interior in the pass rush, whether that's Pierce or Jones on a play where he's on, provides all sorts of opportunities for him to stunt two gaps and make a move on the quarterback. And still got that good cross chop move, can beat a guy to the outside, has not displayed the same kind of spin move, but I'm interested to see if Chuck Smith working with him might change that over the course of the rest of the season.
Yeah, and Ngakoue getting to the quarterback was good to see for Baltimore. I was a little surprised that he was up for this game because I mentioned how good Baltimore did at staying disciplined in their pass rush lanes and not allowing Jayden to find a crease to run a lot of times and bounce to the outside. He's usually one of those freelance pass rushers that kind of gets him into trouble against quarterbacks like this. So I did wonder if that would be in the back of their mind, the concern of him kind of going rogue and opening up a lane for Jayden to kind of take off and burn them. And he didn't, not enough to where it really ended up biting them. So that was a positive sign for them. And I think the big reason Yannick Ngakoue was brought back was because they wanted somebody that can pretty much get to the quarterback when they needed to. John, early in the season, multiple times talked about how he felt like their situational pass rush needed to improve and their fourth quarter pass rush needed to improve. He didn't like how quarterbacks were able to extend plays, which would end up in big plays that would go on to extend drives. So that's what Ngakoue does. It's kind of that mercenary that is out there for one thing and one thing only, and that's to get to the quarterback. So maybe he's another one as the year goes on. You'll start to see him get better and better.
Yeah, Ngakoue in this game only played 22 snaps, and Ajabo only played. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong tab here. Let me get to the right place here. Ngakoue only played 12 snaps, and Ajabo only played 13. Even Tavius Robinson only played 12. So when you've got a short game like this, you get a chance to really have situational pass rushers. I served Ngakoue well in this game. Ajabo's had trouble. He's had trouble being consistent. Threw a great pick last week to get a sack for somebody else. Might have been Van Noy, or not even sure. Might have been Matabike too. But he in general, I don't think he's really hit his stride as a pass rusher. And I think if you're looking for who is John indicting when he says that our fourth quarter pass rush and our situational pass rush is not good enough, I mean, Ajabo is kind of been the big disappointment the last couple of years for the Ravens.
No doubt. I mean, the injury issues have kind of cost him a lot. Is kind of probably the main reason that he's a fraction of himself. I mean, this isn't the same player that was coming out of Michigan that year before he suffered the injury. So it is unfortunate. But he showed signs of life on the back end of preseason and even at the very start of the year. He showed signs of what could be, but it's not happening on a consistent enough basis. And he's just not winning one-on-one right now. Right. I mean, it was multiple times I watched on the film of just the Commanders game. And like I mentioned, that offensive line isn't great, but he can't beat his guy one-on-one right now. And that's kind of the problem. When you have these young pass rushers, you want them to be able to win one-on-one opportunities on the outside, especially when you've got a speed guy like that. So it is unfortunate that he's not able to play at a high level on a consistent basis, but that's kind of the name of the game right now. That happens for some of the guys, and unfortunately it's happening to him.
So third year, so we'll see what ends up happening with him. How about another player you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, Roquan Smith is a guy that I feel like Roquan last week I thought played really well.
Mm-hmm.
This week it was up and down for me. I thought that he's there around the ball. I think a big part of the emphasis was keeping Jaden in the pocket, and I think some of that was on Roquan too, to make sure that if he does get past the first level, Roquan's got to kind of be there to make sure he shuts it down from there. So I'm taking that into account. His pass coverage hasn't been great this year. That's no secret. But unfortunately for him, I think he's been put in some bad situations as well. To have to guard guys that really not many, if any, linebackers can stop, especially when you talk about in the middle of the field with a lot of spacing out there. So I am struggling to try to figure out how much of it is Roquan and how much of it is on coaching, how much of it is the scheme that they're running. So that's the one thing I'm still battling with right now. And I do think some of it is the loss of Patrick Queen. And it's not to say that Patrick Queen is out killing it in Pittsburgh, because he's not. I thought he played pretty well this week. But I'm not saying that, Patrick Queen is leaving the Ravens has kind of made them a worse team. I just think there's something to be said about the camaraderie and the knowing where your team, your partner is going to be. Patrick Queen and Roquan played really well off of each other. Everybody talked about Roquan help building Patrick Queen up, and I think there's something to that. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Patrick Queen helped Roquan play as well as he did as well. So I think with Patrick Queen there, it was clear what the roles were. It was clear what was being asked of who. And maybe right now it seems like Rowe is either being asked to do too much or is trying to do too much. One of the two right now. But I do think it's a little bit of that, because Patrick Queen was a 3-down linebacker, whereas now we talked about it. They're going down more than they have in a while. It's not the same partner next to him every down the way that it was for the last year and a half.
Yeah, I'll maybe take the other side of that coin for a second, because I think that, if you had the choice between having anybody, literally anybody, or Kyle Hamilton next to you, I'll take Kyle Hamilton. Okay, and I trust Kyle Hamilton to do his responsibilities properly. Simpson, I don't think he's been a bad player. Roquan and Simpson seem to have a great relationship with each other, and that shows up all the time. People are always writing about it. I think Trenton has grown as a player. I think this is actually a good thing for him to be eased into this weak side linebacker role. He might be a 3-down player someday. Right now, the Ravens have a great platoon because Trenton Simpson's providing real value on first and second down, and then they're getting Hamilton out there when they are playing dime, and they're getting good value out of it. But I think that Roquan's problem is a little different. Roquan is in the same position that C.J. Mosley was in here at the end of his Ravens career, playing in the middle of what should be, and is not yet, an outstanding pass defense. A lot of playmakers all the way around him, and opposing teams want to pick on him. We saw it in week 1. All the Ravens inside linebackers got picked on against Mahomes. That was where Mahomes wanted to feed the football. The Ravens showed no ability to coach up a counterpunch to the breaking off bunch formations. And Roquan, unfortunately, was the recipient of a lot of that abuse from the thing, when in truth, they had to do something to break up the bunch formation. They had to either get physical with the one man off the bunch who's breaking to the inside, or find some other way to cover that. I do think that Roquan is a good coverage linebacker. The other thing that's really hurting him this year is that the gap between level 2 and level 3 is not being well patrolled. Part of that is maybe Roquan not dropping deep enough. But if you look at PFF statistics, it's basically a matter of the underneath guy usually gets the charge for a target between level 2 and 3. And right now, we just have not seen Marcus Williams coming up and making plays. And I think that has been a big problem. It's been a big problem with Jackson, too. I guess he's less commonly on the same side of the field as Roquan is. But it can happen, but it's probably a little bit less common that occurs. And so I think Roquan's problems are both in terms of assignment, in terms of being asked to do things, and also in terms of some of the scheme things, and some of the play behind him has just been not good enough to really help him out. I'm actually very bullish on Roquan still. It's the safeties where I think the real issue is that are holding down his play, if anything.
I mean, that could very well be the case. I think the issue with the defense in general is that a lot of their best players aren't playing at the highest level. I mean, Kyle Hamilton is still a heck of a player, but he's not playing to the all-pro level that he played at last year, at least not just yet. I think he's playing well, but he's not playing at best safety in the league status that he was playing at last year. Same with a lot of these guys on the defense. I mean, I've talked about Madubuike, whose production-wise is dropped down. I still think Justin Madubuike is a very fine player, but statistically, he's not putting up the same numbers that he was last year. And I think it's kind of it's impacting everybody. And Roquan being the middle of the defense is probably going to show up with him more. That's why I'm saying I think with him, it's kind of tough to tell. I think some of it is assignment driven. I do think he's probably being asked to do too much right now. A lot of people have made a big issue about his weight and feeling like, he's running around a little bit heavier. Maybe it's something to that. That could possibly be the case as well. But all in all, I just think it's not a surprise to see the back end of this defense as a unit kind of production-wise dropping down when you see so many of their players that you thought were going to be really good not playing at their peak the way that we've seen them do just last year.
Yeah.
And some of that could be the coach changes. I mean, that defense has been ravaged with it's been a lot. I don't think it's a coincidence when you talk about Denard Wilson leaving Philadelphia to go to the Ravens, and Philadelphia's secondary stinks. The Ravens have one of the best secondaries in the league. Now he goes to Tennessee. They're the best pass defense in the league, and the Ravens secondary is struggling. I don't think that's a coincidence either.
It was a huge loss, and the Ravens need to be cognizant of that. They I think, hopefully they're continuing to fill that coaching pipeline year after year. And that is, it's just one of the standard things about football is you lose good coaches if you win football games. And the Ravens are going to lose coaches, and it's not that big a deal. I think the fear of losing Monken is way overstated right now, by the way. Would it be bad to lose Todd Monken? It would be non-optimal. Would you make Todd Monken a head coach over John Harbaugh? Not in a million freaking years. Not ever would I make a move like that to try and keep Monken the play caller. Will somebody else do it? Maybe. Will the Ravens find a way to replace it? They will. And the reason I'm so confident about that is that the Ravens have not given up the Greg Roman scheme now. They layered in stuff with Monken, and they kept a lot of their run concepts. They're still there. They're running them today. And that's what makes this the best run offense in the league. They have a lot of good institutional knowledge they won't lose their whole coaching staff if Monken leaves. The problem is that they don't have an obvious internal hire for the position, or was kind of an obvious internal hire. At least I think that's the way they saw it. And they've always pretty much in their history had that. But if they have to replace Monken, they have to replace Monken just because he leaves. He's not at all a guy you say, oh boy, should they make a plan to have Harbaugh be replaced? As I know a lot of people wanted for Macdonald. With Macdonald, it's not the stupidest thing ever because Macdonald's age and Harbaugh's age make more sense, but it still wasn't the kind of thing that had a practical solution. You're going to lose Mike Macdonald because a lot of teams want him, and the Ravens aren't really ready to move on from John Harbaugh, and they shouldn't be. I mean, he's a great coach who's given this team all sorts of stability and value over the years. I understand that there's people who don't feel that way, but here's one thing I'd say about anybody who wants to get rid of John Harbaugh is be honest with yourself and make me up a list of pros and cons of John Harbaugh. And if you can't come up with 24 pros on who John Harbaugh is, there's two possibilities. One is you really haven't thought about it. And two is you're just not being honest about it. You're trying to minimize every strength that he has, or trying to say, oh, that's not really him, that's the organization, or that's the other coaches, or that's the players. And I mean, it was actually a really big risk for John Harbaugh to completely mold this offense around Lamar Jackson. He did a great job of it. It wasn't the organization that made that decision. Yeah, the organization made the decision to draft him, but John Harbaugh had to buy into the notion that they were going to use him like they did. And all of a sudden it became the model for the rest of the National Football League because of how it's worked out. But, to then take credit away from Harbaugh for making that happen originally, it's foolish.
Yeah, I give Harbs credit for that, no doubt. I guess I can't overlook. I think Harbs was in a desperate state Lamar's rookie year. I think, the Ravens were in a bad way, and John was on the hot seat. How hot was that seat? I don't know, but I do think he was on the hot seat that year, and that could have very well have been the end. And he took and at that time, your back is against the wall. It's time to go big or go home. And Lamar was the ultimate high risk, high reward type of situation. And to his credit, he bought in. Granted, he didn't really have a choice because Flacco goes down and Lamar comes in. It's like you can't run the same offense for Lamar that you run for Joe Flacco. It's not rocket science. But they did a really good job of kind of leaning into that, and it's worked. I think John is a great coach. I don't think John is a guy that I'm shoving out of the door. I agree. I'm not letting John go to keep Todd Monken now. I wasn't necessarily banging on the table for them to do that with Mike Macdonald either. Now, I could understand it a little more with Mike Macdonald because I thought Mike Macdonald was the best defensive coordinator in football last year. And I thought he was one of those coaches that was clearly ascending. So I could understand that. Monken is a really good coach. I do think Lamar and Monken are really a perfect match because Monken is very down to earth. He's very realistic. I think Monken does a really good job of self-scouting, and I think he's pretty honest with himself. And so I think he and Lamar have a really good relationship where they respect each other because they're kind of unfiltered with each other. I think they both feel like they can speak their mind without feeling like they're hurting the other person's feelings. They're not afraid to kind of say what's on their mind. So I love that Monken has helped progress this offense. I love that he's helped Lamar's game go to the next level. That was the concern after Roman. I don't think that concern is necessarily there anymore. Lamar is too good. He's shown it too much now for anybody to feel like you have to come in and kind of babysit him and run that same offense that Roman ran years ago. So I do trust them that if Monken is gone, that whoever they bring in is going to be of the same mind, that they're empowering Lamar, they're giving him the keys to the car, they're building this offense around him, they're going to keep a lot of the same principles that they've had throughout the time. When you have Lamar there, you know what you're going to do. Lamar kind of dictates that, not the coach, in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. And it's Lamar is certainly not at a point in his career, and there's always a risk that this happens with a veteran quarterback, but I think it's actually less likely with the personality that Lamar has. He's a very jovial guy. He's kind of a jokester. He's humble, kind of subtle about what's going on. He's not Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers would just be a pain in the ass for anybody. And in fact, if you want to go back to Baltimore, he's not Johnny Unitas, giving his offensive coordinators trouble. And, there's a whole lot of things people love about the way Johnny Unitas played football, and, talk's cheap, let's win. But basically, he gave the various people who had to coach Johnny Unitas, he gave them a bunch of problems. And one of them was, how do you replace Johnny Unitas as he's fading for what was, almost a decade at the end of his career? Johnny Unitas' last good season was in 1967. After that, 68, they had Super Bowl III. Earl Morrall was actually the starting quarterback, so they'd replaced him at that point. And then he came back to give him the 1970 championship. But he basically didn't play for those last 5 years for the Colts. So, the situation you really do not want is to have a star quarterback who has the owner's ear and is just dictating the circumstances within the team. I think we're so far away from that with Lamar Jackson, it's not even funny. And I think whoever comes in knows he's the star, will come in and try and persuade him to accept new offensive elements as you go. And, the other thing is Lamar's going to change as a quarterback at some point. I still think there's a good chance he'll get to 10,000 yards, but he will lose his speed at some point. And he's going to have to become a good, only occasional scrambler who throws more or less from the pocket with a little bit of mobility. But he won't be the same quarterback we know now. Not 8 years from now anyway. He might not be 4 years from now. And that's going to be an interesting change to watch as well. I certainly hope the Ravens will make the move to sign his next contract. You think there's any fear that they would let him walk this next time?
After this deal ends?
Yeah.
I think it's a surefire thing that they're going to get that done. I mean, he has the no franchise tag clause in his deal as well. Yeah. So, that forces the Ravens to kind of get that done a year early, because if not, he's on the open market. So I don't think it'll be the drama-filled situation that it was this past time, where he had a couple of injured seasons, and we don't know what'll happen leading up to his next deal. But Lamar already won an MVP, a second MVP in a different style, and the way he's going right now, he could win his third MVP. So I just feel like right now it's kind of a surefire thing. The Ravens know what they have. The league knows what Lamar is right now. I don't think they'll have an issue. And Eric DeCosta has talked many times since that deal got done about how stressful that deal was. I don't think he wants to go through another contract negotiation like that again.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to the defense here. It's a great rabbit hole, by the way. Love this discussion. Whenever we have a chance to talk football, we always have good things that'll come up like this. I want to talk about Kyle Van Noy, not because he had a great football game, but because of one particular moment that happened. So it was early in the game. Austin Eckler, Van Noy dropped from the line of scrimmage, and he clearly had a responsibility to take Austin Eckler. And you can know in one of two ways. You can look at it and say, well, obviously he's got to running back if he's dropping from the line of scrimmage to that side. But also after the play, if you weren't sure, and it was a little screen that went for -5 plus, I think it was 19 yards. It might have been -5 plus 24 or something like that. But he wasn't in the right place. He wasn't in a position to make the tackle, and he runs up to the pile late, and immediately Trenton Simpson, second-year player, turns to him and starts jawing at him. Van Noy put his hand on him right away, and even though he's back to his turn to him, Simpson shut up immediately, and what you could tell is Van Noy took responsibility immediately for being in the wrong place, which is a fantastic accountability moment. It wasn't a good play. It wasn't worth a 24-yard play to have this, nice hallmark moment come up. But there's two things that were good about it. First is that Van Noy, obviously has taken the blame right away. Second is that Simpson knew when to shut up. That's the point where you don't say more. The other guy has already admitted responsibility for it. Let it go. And also, I like the fact that Simpson's in his face right away as a second-year player. Talking to a 34-year-old guy about how he screwed up on the play. It was a great team culture moment there that I really appreciated.
Yeah, I think Van Noy is one of those guys where you got to know how to deal with him, because he's one of those people that, had it been the other way around, he's probably the first one to say something to Trenton Simpson, and so that's just Simpson holding him accountable the same way Van Noy would have held him accountable. And I think that is important for a defense, because if you're going to set the rule that only the veterans can hold the young guys accountable and not the other way around, what type of situation are we running here? But I do like what Van Noy gives them. He's been really good, primarily as a situational pass rusher. He's talked a lot about just the Ravens allowing him to do what he feels like he can do best, which is get to the quarterback. Him and Wiley had a nice battle, I thought, on Sunday, going at it quite a few times, matched up against each other. But overall, I like what Van Noy gives them. I thought coming out of last year, I thought Clowney is the one that you'd want to have back between the two. And it's tough for me to truly quantify Clowney's season right now, playing for the Carolina Panthers, who are just a complete dumpster fire. I mean, nobody's really putting up numbers out there. So it's tough for me to kind of compare what the two are doing right now. But no doubt getting Van Noy back was huge for this pass rush, huge for this defense. Gives them that keeps their veteran leadership there, gives them a guy that they know seems to be getting better as his career gets further and further along. So he's another one that you can't necessarily just look at what he's doing in the regular season. His weight and goal will show up hopefully on the back end of the season into the playoffs, where he's making those plays that win you football games.
Oh, I think it's your turn. You got another player you want to talk about? I got one more I need to hit on before we get out of here, but
Nate Wiggins is one. Nate Wiggins, I think, is a player that definitely shows upside. What I love about Nate Wiggins is his confidence, first and foremost. You got to have that to play the position, because you're going up against probably the most confident players on the field and wide receivers. So that in itself is already a good step one. I love his speed. I love the fact that he has played more physical than I think a lot of people gave him credit for coming out, because all people talked about was his lack of size and his, skinny stature. But this dude does play physical. Now, his physicality gets him into some trouble. And I always go back to rookie minicamp when we talked to Nate Wiggins for the first time in person. And I asked him, what did he feel like was going to be the biggest adjustment for him going from college to the pros? And he said, knowing how handsy he can be down the field. In college, they let a lot of that stuff go, whereas here at the professional level, they're looking to throw the flag down the field when you're breathing on receivers. So we saw it again Sunday late in the game. He kind of extends that Commanders drive and gets the pass interference down the field, guarding Noah Brown. They isolated him on that side, ran the go route. I don't think that was a coincidence. That's gotten him in trouble quite a few times this year, being a little too handsy. And I think his aggressiveness kind of bites him with his eyes a little bit. I think he plays a little too much with his eyes, as opposed to kind of sticking to his assignment, sticking to his true technique. And look, he's a young player. This isn't something that only he exclusively deals with. It's not out of the norm for young players to be susceptible to some of the double moves. And for a guy with his speed, he feels like he can always kind of make up that ground, even when he does get into trouble. So that in itself can kind of be a little dangerous. So I love his upside. Don't get me wrong. I do think he'll be a fine player. But I don't think it'll be the worst thing in the world if his snaps go down a little bit, just because it may allow you to get more of the good sample size from him and maybe lessen some of those plays where teams are able to kind of get him in those predicaments to where he feels like he has to go back to his natural instinct of using his hands and kind of extending drives and getting matched up on some guys you really don't want him to be matched up on. I think back to that Cowboys game where he was on CeeDee Lamb a little too much for my liking. And the Cowboys exploited that. And I think the Ravens have enough DBs, specifically enough corners, to where Nate Wiggins doesn't have to be on a lot of the premier receivers right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Ravens don't chase. So Stevens is a right corner and Wiggins has a left corner. So it is one of the problems is they always know who they're getting on Wiggins. The other team always knows that. So you'd almost be better off if they had a little bit of chasing there. But corners got their favorite shoulder, and they want to approach the ball in a certain way. And I think more of it is on Stevens, that he really likes to play right corner than would necessarily be on Wiggins. The thing I want to say about Wiggins, I wish one element of confidence would show up more, and that is his confidence in his makeup speed. He had it in spades in college. Only had one penalty in college in his senior year, in his last year, I should say. And he made all sorts of other plays, running all over the football field to find the ball in the air, to knock it out of one running back's hands in the North Carolina game. He wasn't getting beat much, and he trusted his speed a whole lot. I kind of wish he'd go back to more of that, and not use the hands as a crutch to do that. And yeah, he's grabbing jersey. I mean, he's doing things he really didn't do in college. He was so much faster than everybody else at the college level. He really didn't have to in the same way. You may also be right. I can't say that I saw him grabbing a lot in college, but if he says he was doing it, then that's probably a better indicator that he was doing some of that. He's one of the few guys that's come out in recent years and Devin Witherspoon be another big example, where the physical characteristics, the speed, some of the jumps and other things completely are borne out by the coverage results. That is, I can't tell you how rare that is, that how often you're speculating on a cornerback being able to adapt to the NFL because of traits that doesn't have great characteristics. Gonzalez, a great example of that, by the way, last year to New England. Or how often you're looking at production and trying to figure out whether the traits are going to match. Malcolm Forbes, with the undersizedness, Emmanuel Forbes be a great example of that as well, going in the other direction. But he and Witherspoon, they had it all coming out of school, and that's why he was my number one cornerback this last year. I think he's going to be fine as a player, and I don't want to see his snaps cut, but I kind of still understand your point, Cordell, that if he played a few fewer snaps, maybe the other team wouldn't know always when they call the play in the huddle when he's going to be on the field, because you react to the personnel. So you got some advantages that could come from that. All right, I want to pick up one more player. That's Marlon Humphrey, who I just thought a fantastic game. He had one PD. He had two others where he forced the grounding of the football that was thrown in his direction. And it should count as a PD, but somehow it doesn't. But he had the underneath side of bracket coverage right by the right pylon on one play that forced one, and another was coming downhill on a runner on a receiver. And I forget if it was a back or a wide receiver actually, but it was a behind the line of scrimmage throw that Daniels was going to make, and he grounded the football at his feet because he saw Humphrey coming down and the potential for a loss on the play or even a pick potentially. He's influencing the game. He's getting to where he needs to go, and we've gone from having two players I think that the Ravens might cut at the end of the year, and Andrews and Humphrey, to there now being no real doubt about which one is staying and how I'd go moving forward. And I think some of that also deals with the Stevens contract. That if you keep Humphrey and you maybe sign him up for longer, you're in a position where you can let Stevens go and go with a Humphrey-Wiggins cornerback tandem.
Yeah, honestly, I think Marlon will be in a Raven as long as I'm not going to say as long as he wants, but if he plays like this, I think he'll be a Raven possibly for his entire career, if not most of his career. Last year, these last couple of years, Marlon has dealt with the injuries, and that's been his biggest problem. We mentioned that with Stanley, but and the turnover rates have gone down. He's picked up the turnovers a little bit this year compared to last year for sure. But I think Marlon at his best gives the Ravens exactly what they're looking for. Physical corner that's not afraid to tackle in the run game, that can make plays on the ball, that can come up and play press coverage on receivers, can play inside, can play outside. I mean, he's kind of ideally what you're looking for at the cornerback position. So I do think he'll kind of be around as long as he can show himself to stay healthy and play at somewhat of a high level. I think Marlon's been great for them. I mean, he's probably been their most consistent player on the defensive side of the ball to this point in the season, honestly. And he is one of the guys that has had the great camp translate into so far having a really good season, by far the best one in the secondary for sure. So yeah, I've been very impressed with Marlon Humphrey on the field to this point. It seems like he has been making a play every week. You mentioned a couple of the plays that he showed up in just this past week. I think the one where Daniels Dirks hit in the ground, I think, and this is me speculating, but in real time, I thought he was kind of using that as an extra timeout because they only had one and I think it was maybe 15 seconds left in the half. Marlon being there and probably turning it into a negative play helped it, I'm sure, because negative play in that instance with less than 20 seconds left in the half does you no good. But yeah, I think Marlon's just playing great inside and out, and especially with Millette not being able to play there, and they're probably asking Marlon to move around a little more than they would have if Millette was there, and he's still playing so well. I think that's been huge for this defense, which has kind of been overlooked with all the questions people have about this past defense to this point in the season.
Yeah. He's been a fine slot corner. It's been one of the really versatile pieces. I guess one of the other questions I have about Marlon, which I'd like to get your take on, is when do you think the Ravens move him to safety? Now, they have a need right now there, and he could be a big part of that answer if he were to move to strong safety. It just seems like it's too early, given how well he's playing at corner right now.
Yeah, I think right now probably isn't the case. They've never mentioned it. We've never really seen them toy around with it very often. So I think usually guys, when you talk about corners translating to safety, it feels like they lost a step at that point. Usually speed wise, and I mean, granted, that was the case coming out of last year with Marlon. Nobody really knew if Marlon could play at the level that he's playing at least consistently anymore. So I don't know. It's tough for me to say. And Marlon's still such a young player that really, I mean, I know at times we talk about his body breaking down on him at times, so it makes you forget how young of a player he is, but he's still pretty young in the grand scheme of things. So it's tough for me to envision that right now, but definitely on the back end, they get another corner or two in here. We're talking about Wiggins starting to really look like what they expected him to look like. And, some of these other guys stepping up. And if safety is still a need, then of course, Marlon would be great that he meets the physicality. He has the ball skills to do it. He has the IQ to play back there as well. I mean, you put a guy that's been so good that close to the line of scrimmage. Now he plays on the back end where he can kind of see the entire field and see the play forming. It's really no telling what he could do back there. I think that's the case for a lot of corners. But right now it's tough for me to necessarily see that because I just haven't seen it to this point.
I did ask him about it this summer, and his response to it was, I asked him if the conversations had happened yet. He goes, no, the conversations hadn't happened, but he saw himself finishing his career at safety. He always had seen that. And he didn't put a timetable on it or anything like that. But it might be a case where you're better off doing it a year early than a year too late kind of thing. So the Ravens will have an option, if they have a need and he's a great either split field. I mean, the other thing I've hypothesized by is that he could be a guy you move up and back with Kyle Hamilton. You want Kyle Hamilton close to the line of scrimmage? Go ahead and put Kyle Hamilton close to the line of scrimmage as the slot corner. You want to switch that and pick Marlon Humphrey the slot corner? You could do that on a play-by-play basis. Once those guys, both of them understand probably those positions. Well, okay, I'll say for certain Hamilton understands both those positions. Humphrey already has done so much in this league. I think it would be a very small step for him to learn the safety position and his different set of responsibilities he needs to make. He already comes off his own receiver to make a play on somebody else's ball more often than just about anybody you'll see. I mean, it's remarkable in that way. Jimmy Smith, by the way, was at the end of his career too. Just didn't really have the physicality to move to safety. But anyway, I'll be excited about that. How about we take a couple of mailbag questions and then I'll have to let you go, I think, for your other obligations, and I'll finish up with the pass rush on the show if that works for you, Cordell.
Yep.
All right. So here's one from Jacob Leeper. He says, with the emergence of Travis Jones, how does the Ravens front office navigate future contracts with Flowers, Linderbaum, Hamilton, Jones, and Likely? Who is the most likely to hit free agency? Can't pay them all.
We're saying he said Hamilton, Jones, Likely, and Flowers.
Flowers, Linderbaum, Hamilton, Jones, and Likely.
Yeah, I mean, out of that group, I would say it's probably between, and I know the problem is, for me, it would be one of the interior guys, either Linderbaum or Jones for me. But the Ravens value the trenches as much as anybody. Granted, they didn't necessarily show that opening up 3 spots on the offensive line after last year, but albeit, I would have to say probably Jones is probably the most expendable out of that group in my mind. And I mean, it's a tough choice. All of them are fantastic players. Linderbaum is just, I mean, he's been a Pro Bowler. He's playing like he could end up being one of the best centers in football. Travis Jones obviously can play to the level to where he could be one of the best defensive tackles in the league as well, but you kind of got to pick your poison. You're not going to let Zay go anywhere. I think Isaiah Likely is kind of already cemented as the guy that's going to take over from Mark Andrews when it's all said and done right now. Hamilton's not going anywhere. So it kind of process of elimination, it's a tough choice to make, but it would be between Linderbaum and Jones. And for me, it's probably going to be Jones just because you would think that you can find somebody else that can kind of pick up with what he's been able to do, and hopefully is just as big of a body. The Ravens are known for having great interior defensive linemen. They've done that throughout their history. You'd hope that they'd be able to do that again.
That's I really don't see Jones as expendable, but then all the other guys, they're so great. It's really hard to see them letting go likely. Here, the guy I think could be priced out of Baltimore, whether we like it or not, is Zay Flowers. And it doesn't matter that the Ravens need to keep him, want to keep him, all of that. If wide receivers are making $30 million a year, if he gets offered, something close to Tyreek Hill money to leave the Ravens, I think the Ravens have to change their draft philosophy or they really haven't changed it. This is where they've been the last few years, is drafting more wide receivers because they're too expensive to find on the open market. But the last 5 years they've gotten Marquise Brown, they've gotten Flowers, and they've gotten Bateman, all with first round picks, and they haven't had premium picks to really get any of these guys. I think the highest any of them was drafted was about 22, right? So I kind of like taking more swings at the wide receiver position. I don't want to see Zay go anywhere. I really don't want to see Zay go anywhere. We're having this discussion after he's just had the best game of his career. I think, Lamar would be upset about it probably rightfully so if he did leave. But on the other hand, if it's a 2-for-1 exchange, if I can have Jones and Linderbaum at the same price I can have Zay for, it's probably not quite that much, but it's in that ballpark. Then I'm pondering. So I think Flowers is a guy who could price himself out, and they've got a chance. They've got a chance to try and sign him early coming up.
Yeah, I guess I just always, skill position is, for me at least, is going, and it's everything's important. Don't get me wrong. I just feel like the receiver can probably impacts the game more than the defense, than the interior defensive lineman in my mind. And like the dynamic with Zay and Lamar, that would be a part of the equation. I mean, Hollywood, as you mentioned, he left, and that left a sour taste in a couple of people's mouths, including Lamar Jackson, but he left for other reasons. They haven't been in a position that they're going to be in with Zay to where they have to pay a receiver, their own receiver that they drafted, big money at that point. So I am curious to see how it goes, because the price tag for wide receivers is skyrocketing these days. And I would imagine Zay's going to cost a pretty penny. I think as of now, Zay wants to stay. He wants to stay with his boy, Lamar. They're really tight. The Florida situation the Florida connection that the Ravens have built, not just with Lamar and Zay, but just with a lot of guys on this team. I'd be curious to see how that unfolds for sure.
Okay, got a great question from Miggy Duran about Roquan. I think we covered Roquan enough in this show, Miggy, but I do appreciate the question. He says, is Roquan playing slower, or is he given too many things to read, or am I expecting too much? I think we hit on some of that earlier, so we're going to let that go, but appreciate the question. Lyman's Backpack with a question for us. He says, can the Ravens be too good at run defense? By being so good against the run, do we force opposing teams to abandon the run early, leading to increased passing, which has higher win probability added per play? Interesting point.
Yeah, I can understand what that question is, and I think that's a good way to look at it. I'm going to say no, though, just because the formula of you gave the numbers earlier of the Ravens' dominant rushing attack matched with their ability to shut down the run on the other side. That's about what you're looking for. It's not necessarily about what's happening in September and October. For me, it's about what's happening in December and January. And when you get to that time of the year, if you can run the ball successfully and shut down the run successfully, you're probably going to have success on the back end of the season. So give me that formula every day of the week. I understand people are going to throw the ball, and your big splash plays in the pass game can kill you. I totally understand that, but I'm playing the long game here, and if my running the ball is as successful as it is for the Ravens, and you get to eat up clock and score at the same time, and you combine that with teams being forced to be one-dimensional and get in situations to where if they're going to throw the ball, that makes them susceptible to sacks now. So now you're talking about getting teams in third and long situations as opposed to them still incorporating the run and kind of staying on schedule. So I'll take that, but it's a good, it's definitely a unique way to look at it. But yeah, give me a dominant rush defense all day, every day.
So I think I would state it a little differently, because I'm really happy with the dominant rush defense. Don't get me wrong. And what I'm really super happy about is the Ravens can stop 11 personnel runs with the nickel. And that is not something every football team every team in the National Football League can do. Now, a lot of teams cannot do it. They have to do something special to bring people close to the line of scrimmage to be able to stop the run. What I would suggest would be a better strategy is for Orr to embrace some more of the Macdonald concepts from last year, where he stayed with too high a little longer and was willing to sacrifice some run defense for it. So they gave up close to 4.5 yards per carry last year. It's one of the really outlier years in Ravens history, but they more than made up for that in terms of their effectiveness against the pass. And I would be in favor of seeing more of that. I think already by moving to the dime on 2nd and 10, for example, that we're showing indication of a team that says, we can stop the run no matter what. Go ahead and if you want to run the ball on 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8, 2nd and 10, we're gonna have guys out there who you can run it against, and good luck to you. But I think that the Ravens probably would be well suited to give up some run vulnerability in exchange for some gains in the passing game. And that what that basically means is you keep showing them too high and you take away more deep passes. That's what it means. So you only have you have two guys way off the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I mean I think that's a good point. I don't know. My question would be, if they do decide to go more too high, because their biggest issue has been the middle of the field, the short to intermediate parts of that defense. So that would be my question is, all right, if you're going to go too high, how often is that robber there? Like, are we emphasizing there being somebody to be there to help that weak area in the middle?
First of all, absolutely. That's the question. And most of the too high looks from Macdonald are looks. Okay, they didn't stay in too high all the time. They go to a lot of single high, and they rotate. You mentioned the robber. You have a chance to erase routes there, but against the noodly armed quarterbacks that exist who have good accuracy, and Joe Burrow is the prime example within the division. He's a guy who just doesn't have a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. He lives on accuracy. He lives on ball placement and whatnot, but you really dissuade him from throwing the deep ball when you have two safeties back. And Geno Stone and Marcus Williams were really doing that last year. Less so in this last game, obviously, against Burrow, but he had all his weapons healthy and was willing to take a few more shots down the field. But I think anytime you force the opponent to throw underneath on a regular basis because they don't like your too high look, I think that's probably a good thing. Now, you can't afford to get consistently burned the way Mahomes did to the Ravens in week 1, where you have one particular play type you're just unbelievably vulnerable to and you don't adjust for it. But I'm in favor of more too high starting looks, more persistent too high, throughout the play to basically dissuade other quarterbacks from taking advantage of deep shots. And I think that would really make it a lot easier for both Stevens and Wiggins on the outside specifically to be more comfortable that over the top help was there. And maybe it doesn't help the middle of the field as much, but I think it could.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, like you said, them going into more dime, I think is kind of showing signs of them leaning into that a little bit right now. And Macdonald was just so good about pre-snap giving a look, and then as soon as the ball is snapped, you've got something totally different. I mean, how many offensive coordinators and quarterbacks did he leave completely confused for 4 quarters last year? And that just hasn't necessarily been the case this year. Maybe that's and I think a lot of it has been their communication has been a problem. I mean, even in the game on Sunday against the Commanders, a lot of pointing and yelling at each other pre-snap to kind of get somebody to get in the right spot. It seems like they're still struggling with that part. That was a bit of the problem in Mike Macdonald's first couple of games here as well, which is expected when you have a new voice at the head of the defense. That was not an issue for them much last year at all. So I think once the communication cleans up, maybe that's when you'll start to see the back end start to play more consistently.
All right. Cordell, thanks so much for spending a couple hours with me. I know this is a really tough time for you to get away for this amount of time, and we've got to let you go to your next assignment here. Tell folks where they can either communicate with you if they'd like to contact you and talk football, or where they can hear your shows.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Ken. As always, you can follow me on social media at Cordell Woodland. Check out my show, Shaking It Up Sports, on 105.7 The Fan. Even if you're not here in Baltimore, you can download the Odyssey app. Listen anytime. I'm never know when my show is on. I do weeknights, so a lot of different things going on. MLB playoffs, we're in football season, so you never really know when you'll catch me on or filling in on some of the daytime shows. But if you turn into 105.7 The Fan, it's a good chance you'll hear me at some point.
Yeah, one of the really good analysts, and he's all over the place right now. So I take every opportunity to listen when I can, and I appreciate you coming on again, Cordell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ken.
All right, folks, going to continue on with the pass rush here. Just talk about that for a few minutes. And an interesting game for the pass rush against the Commanders here. They frankly put up a fairly vanilla rush in this game. They allowed a number of ample time and space opportunities to Daniels. Now, some of that was by design. They wanted to keep Daniels contained, but the containment had a cost that came with it that we really need to talk about. So overall, they had 15 ATS opportunities, only 13 pressures. That's a really bad ratio. You don't want to have fewer pressures than ATS opportunities. They also had 10 times the ball was out quickly. When I look at that as a whole, he should have thrown for approximately 233 expected yards. That uses my 8.5, 6, and 3.5 number. But it's a number he exceeded by 20 yards. And in this case, I would say it was more the pass rush that didn't deliver on limiting the opportunity set, as opposed to the coverage giving up an extra 20 yards relative to that opportunity set. So that's where I am kind of on the pairing this week. And last week, it was all about the pass rush delivered a great opportunity set to hold down Burrow's numbers, and he still exceeded it by 140 yards, which I really put it as more on the back end, that they really could not contain Chase and Higgins. They couldn't tackle Chase, obviously, on that 70-yard play. They couldn't get him on the ground. They had some blown assignments during the game. So you had a few things that happened in that game that were not ideal. This time, just the opportunity set was awfully good, awfully juicy for Daniels. And I'm sure if you're a Washington Commanders fan, you probably really appreciated the fact that he had, at times, time to make a sandwich in the pocket and survey the field, make his reads, and throw some strikes. With ATS, 15 plays, 39%, 157 yards, 10.5 yards per play. That's better than expected. It's about 30 yards better than his standard. With ball out quick, 10 plays, that's 26%, 67 yards, 6.7 yards per play. That's a little better than normal, about 6 yards per play, again, is the standard. With pressure, 13 plays, that's about 34%, kind of a low percentage there to start with. 29 yards, 2.2 yards per play, and 3 sacks. Nothing wrong with the results when they got pressure. It's the frequency of pressure that was really the issue. And they didn't do a lot to do that. They rushed very little in the way of numbers, or used only 5 rushes of 5+ the entire game. Didn't do a lot of off-ball blitzing in this game. I have the number here, and I want to make sure I quote this correctly. But off-ball blitzes, they used 8 off-ball blitzes. That's 0.21 per play. That's low. That's not 5+. Those are players who were disguising their blitz and coming from at least 1.5 yards off the line of scrimmage, or at least as far out as the slot receiver. And they did okay on those plays, 7.7 yards per play. They did give up still 2 ATS opportunities, but they got 5 pressures on those plays. Obviously 7.7 yards per play you're not excited about, nor are you excited about the size of the sample size there. It's not a lot to go on. 5 stunts. Now, stunts is something I'd expect them really to have done a lot less against Daniels, because you can't afford for the integrity of your rush lanes to be broken down by stunts. So they had to pick their places. 5 stunts is extremely few for a full football game, and they got 6.4 yards per play. The Commanders did on those plays. So did a reasonably good job with stunts. They showed simulated pressure only twice the entire game. Now, that is something I thought they would have done some of. But for whatever reason, they figured Daniels would pick them apart some. If they showed him simulated pressure, he would take some hot reads and make some plays out of that. And this is a case where they only had 2 or more, and it was once 2 and once 4, actually, dropping from the line of scrimmage. They only did that twice during the game. They also only had 2 deceptive rushes, 4 deceptive rushes that included 2 or more elements of off-ball blitzes, stunts, and simulated pressures. Those plays went for 35 yards, 8.8 per play. Again, small sample sizes all across the board here. The major point I'm making is that Orr didn't use a lot of deception, and he didn't use a lot of numbers in what he did. As I score it in terms of not crediting a pressure on events where you force somebody out of the pocket, nobody had more than 2 contributions to 2 pressure events in the entire game. Now, Madubuike might have had more than that if he included times he made the quarterback run or was part of the trailing people who were chasing Daniels from the pocket, but those are not included in that group. So overall, a fairly simplified pass rush for Orr, and one that I think the overall result is good. I don't think I really have a problem with that. But if I had to say anything, it would be that maybe they could have tried a few more off-ball free runs at the quarterback to try and generate pressure. But I don't generally have a problem with the way it was handled. Obviously, they did a good job in terms of having 5 or 6 rush. They did 6 times for 64 yards. So they got 10.7 yards per play when the Ravens did rush 5+. So it's probably a damn good thing that they didn't try a lot more plays of that type. Of course, one of the times they rushed 6 was the Van Noy play where he messed up on the screen pass. So that's a lot of the yards in that one. So again, we're dealing with some small sample sizes here. But if I'm looking at Orr right now during the season, one of the things that's kind of getting me, and I think that this will come, is that he hasn't really been great about making in-game adjustments to improve a situation which is consistently beating him. So the best example of doing it was going to the dime defense in the middle of that Dallas game and really getting the now deciding that that's the place where they want to make their hay, is with the dime. I think that was a good one. But then we have good examples where it didn't really work out, not being on Adams and Bowers in week 2 and figuring out how to take those routes away with robbers, with safety help, with whatever it might be. In week 1, obviously not figuring out how to deal with bunch formations and the picks and rubs that they just ran all day with Mahomes, throwing darts to those receivers. That was a problem as well. But, Orr, again, just starting out in the league, young defensive coordinator. I'm confident he's going to be very good at what he does. I think he just needs some time to make the job his, for people to forget some of the things that Mike Macdonald made, and for Orr maybe not to forget them and bring back more too high looks, as I mentioned in the final discussion there with Cordell, to try and take away some deep passing opportunities and cut down on some of the problems that probably both Wiggins and Stevens have had in terms of giving up some big plays this year. Safety help, a bracket, it can help in more ways than just that guy makes a play on the football. It can help because the quarterback is now afraid to throw the ball there at all. And having that help often changes a throw that's over the head of the receiver, or it might be thrown to the back shoulder, into the quarterback throwing the ball away or going to his next read, because he doesn't want to risk the chance of that cornerback playing underneath or over the top for the safety when he throws that ball. Quarterback's extremely interception leery and they they have that in mind as their first responsibility, is that ball security. All right, well, that's going to do it for today's show. We've been through this. Really appreciate Cordell Woodland joining us, and hope you folks out there enjoyed it. Please, if you will, if you're a fan of the show, and I know you are, if you're still listening to this on the 2 hours and 15 minutes into the recording or so this time, please help popularize the show by telling somebody else about it. Perhaps help somebody you know who doesn't really use podcasts find the thing on his computer. Or if you otherwise can write a 50-word review, always appreciate that. That's will help drive content to the show. We'll talk to you next time on the offensive show. That'll come up tomorrow. The guest for that is Yuri. Looking forward to hearing from him, talk through the offensive things. And, of course, through the rest of the week, we'll have one last thing, the Know Your Foe episodes, the 2 matchup episodes, and, of course, Friday Morning GM on Friday. I hope you'll give those shows a shot if you have not tried them already. It's Ken McKusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.